What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 343. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, a frequent Limited Resource from about, 4 or 5 miles away. It's Kenji Egashira. Kenji, welcome back to LR.
It's about dang time, Marshall. I tell you, geez, I keep knocking on the door. You just close the blinds. Just don't let me in. You pretend you're not. I call you. I see it says red and whatnot, but it's just not there. And whatever. Okay. I'm here.
The deal is, for those of you that haven't heard, Luis and his wife had their baby. So congratulations to Luis and to Geneva. They had their baby, and we welcome her into the Limited Resources family. And super exciting stuff for Luis. So we thought, best case here, or best practice here would be, all right, let's let Luis go be with the family and get adjusted to his new life with Naya. And we were going to bring Owen Turtenwald for the set review shows. That was our plan. But Naya showed up a couple of weeks early. So I decided, okay, well, let's let Luis go get adjusted to his new life. It's happening right now. And I'll find some guest hosts. And I thought this would be a great time to bring Kenji back on the show. Kenji, people always ask for you to come on the show. And I'm really happy to have you back for the Sunset Show for Shadows over Innistrad. That's what we're going to be doing here. And hopefully we're going to get you back next week for the rules. And as well as the preview cards for next week's show. Hopefully we can clear some calendar space for you for that. And that should be fun.
Yeah.
So it's going to be awesome. Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. I'm even more excited to see where Naya catapults herself to in the Cheon rankings, because I think I'm like third or something right now, and Paul's like 17th or whatever. I'm sure she'll jump up to 2 or 1 very, very quickly.
Yeah, especially because she's brand new. She's got that newness factor, and so yeah, she'll get a lot of value out of that. All right, so before we get into everything on the Sunset Show, I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Please do visit them for all of your magic needs. It really helps out the show, and we do appreciate it. They have a full selection of singles, anything you need magic related, they're going to have it, as well as supplies. You can get that there. Of course, awesome free content. You know about that. You know that that's a place to go. It's free. You just show up, you load up your webpage, channelfireball.com, and boom, you've got awesome videos. You've got articles by some of the best players in the world, podcasts like the one you're listening to right now, videos, all that kind of sweet stuff to check out over there for free every single day. And the thing I really liked about CFB when we were negotiating, talking about bringing LR kind of into the fold there, was I know that they have the same goal that this show does, which is to help you improve at Magic, and they hire the people, the writers and stuff that really have that same mentality. And you can see it when you go there and you read one of the articles. What they're doing. They're trying to help you win your next tournament. They're trying to help you improve at Magic. And that was one of the big pulls for me because, that's the whole point of this show. Also, Limited Resources is brought to you by you, the patrons, on patreon.com/limited resources. You can find all types of cool stuff. In fact, I put a post up a couple of days ago. I'm doing a giveaway. I'm going to do it next week on the show because I wanted to make sure that people that listened this week had a chance to know about it. I've got this original Magic art. I mentioned it on the show a while back. Did a Kickstarter, and I've got this beautiful playmat. Kenji, have you seen this playmat?
I think I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah, I tweeted it. Yeah,
yes.
It's got the wave, like the old Japanese artwork.
Yes,
I can't remember what it's called, but oh my God, it is flat out gorgeous. And and I've also got a full set of the tokens that came with that too, including Elmer and Shelley tokens. Those were a stretch goal. I don't know if you knew that, listeners, but those were a stretch goal for the Kickstarter, and they hit that goal. And so there is an Elmer and a Shelley token in there, along with a bunch of other awesome ones. I'm going to give that away next week here on Limited Resources. Okay. One of the things that you get for being a patron is you get to ask questions. So let's take a look at the listener question this week, Kenji. It says, Marshall and Kenji, love the show and the banter between you two. Thank you. We do get along
thanks.
well.
That's really nice.
And it's a pleasure to listen to. You are both very funny, and I can't wait to meet you at a local event. Gosh, he really likes you, Kenji. All right, here's the meat of the question, though. What number pick is the breaking point in which you need to decide on what you're going to do with your draft deck? I seem to have a huge problem with marrying my first pick. He even put a frowny face at the end. So that's from Julian Tavares. Julian, great question, and one that we talk about quite a bit on the show as far as a general approach to drafting. For me, and Kenji, I'm pretty sure you approach it a similar way. I try to stay open, right? And that brings on natural questions, right? I say, well, I try to stay open as long as I can to try to read the table, see what colors, what archetypes are open. And then I want to move into the one that I feel is most open so that I can benefit from that decision for the rest of that pack and then the following 2 packs to make up the whole draft. The interesting thing, though, is, well, how long is as long as possible, which is what Julian's getting here, because it does beg the question. I could stay open the whole draft, right? I could just stay open from pick 1 to pick 42 or whatever. But the problem with that, of course, is that my deck would be a train wreck because I'd be constantly switching around and never really committing to anything. You do have to commit at some point. And Julian wants to know, at what point do you have to do that? And I got to say, it's interesting. There is not a pick number. It's a little more nebulous than that. And for me, it comes into 2 different spots, most commonly. It changes around, but it comes in most commonly 2 different spots. First spot is about 5 to 6 picks or so into the first pack, maybe 7 picks. Sometimes I'll be like, look, this seems like it's open. It's a strategy I think is good. And I'm starting to already solidify myself. Maybe I opened up a really sweet rare that goes in the color pair or the strategy that I'm doing. And now I'm going to start to solidify myself in that once I start seeing a few more good cards. It does happen that early for me sometimes. The other times when it happens is actually within the first 3 picks of the second pack. And I know that sounds weird, but what I find myself doing ideally in the position I love to be in is sometimes I'll commit hard to a color in the first pack and then have a few feelers out for a couple of other colors. So, I'll be heavy in red and I'll have a whole bunch of red cards. And then I'll have like a good black card, a good white card, and like 2 medium green cards. And that's my whole pack. And so I know I'm going to be in red. That can't really change at this point, but I could easily change into the other 2 or 3 colors, or even into a totally another color. I could go into blue if I open up a sweet blue card. And I'll usually try to make that decision early in pack 2, because that's about, I think, as late as you can go. What do you think about this, Kenji? At what pick or what spot in the draft do you find yourself committing mostly?
I agree with you. It's probably between picks 5 and 7 for me. The most interesting thing, I think, is what comes on the wheel, because then you get to see what comes back from your initial pack. Oh, this really good green card came back, and I'm already taking some green cards. Or maybe you're not taking green cards, and that turns you on to taking the green cards. So you kind of feel around as the packs come back around. It really depends on format too. I know for formats like Modern Masters, 40 of the 45 cards you see are going to be playable. And so in those type of formats, it's much more beneficial to stay open all the way until pack 2 sometimes, right? Because if you read the signals, you're going to get that much more powerful of a deck, since all of the cards are basically playable anyways. In more standard drafting formats, I'd say you probably want to be solidified into something by pack 2. Although, like you said, Marshall, I think it is okay to be heavier in one color and kind of having those feeling tentacles for Emrakul, obviously, tentacles out there, seeing what color is open, or maybe you open just something really good and that pulls you into a secondary color. So, yeah, I have the similar feelings that you have, but again, it depends on format as well.
Especially because we do see Cube and these, Masters sets, these Modern Masters, Eternal Masters, Vintage. These sets are popping up more and more. We're getting one of them a year or something. And then the Cube, will pop up on Magic Online, and a lot of people, own cubes locally. And that I totally did not remember that when I was giving my answer a minute ago. I was basically speaking only to the current level sets, but those are a big part of what people draft these days. And I stay open way later. I'm just like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It's fine. It'll be fine. I can switch. It'll be like, the only thing I feel like I'm giving up is sideboard. Like if I take a lot longer to decide what colors or what archetype I'm going to be in like a cube draft, I know that there's a lot of sideboard slots that I'm giving up because I'm waffling on colors, but I'm willing to do that. I don't mind at all. It's just, normally I think that, you can really build a pretty powerful sideboard in those type of formats. But
oh yeah, for sure. If you jump into something early in those old, or rather not old formats, but formats where there are so many playables, and you're able to pick up all those important sideboard cards, like you're just going to have the insane deck, because not only is your deck going to be great, your sideboard is going to have everything that you need to combat a deck that might be, well tuned against yours.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so that's the question of the week. Let's move on to Last Shadows over Innistrad Crack-A-Pack. You get to be here for it, Kenji. This one comes from Jed Jacobson. Thank you, Jed, for the pack.
Kind of happy that it's the last one. I'm ready for a new set.
I'll be honest, I am too. Nothing against Shadows. I think it was a good set. But you know, these things kind of run their course, right? It's not the kind of thing it's not the kind of set that I want to draft forever necessarily. And I think it needs a little shakeup. Okay, first card, Jace's Scrutiny.
Thumb up.
Yeah, I like Jace's Scrutiny, though I don't think I've first picked it before. I like this next card too, Dauntless Cathar.
Ooh, okay. I like that one. Value.
I like that one better than Jace's Scrutiny. Ghostly Wings. No.
Madness Enabler.
It is. Kind of
now it's your opponent's creature. Hey, you can put it on your opponent's creature.
It is a thing. Magmatic Chasm.
I
might need to put that on one of the lists we have for our Sunset Show, by the way. Merciless Resolve.
I think I've cast that maybe 0.5 times ever.
I think I cast it twice. It's weird because it's not that bad of a card on the surface, but it just doesn't have a home in the format. It just didn't end up fitting. Hulking Devil.
Blech.
Nope. Sorry, buddy. Thornhide Wolves.
That's actually a decent
fine, but it's
vanilla.
not better than Dauntless Cathar, right?
No, I don't think so.
All right, here's a fighter. Murderous Compulsion.
Yep, that's a good one. I like it.
Okay. Now, do you like it better than Dauntless Cathar?
Yeah, I think right now it's Compulsion, Cathar, and then Thornhide.
Okay. This is a card, by the way, we're getting into the uncommons now that I wish was better. Trail of Evidence.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I think you want it to be good. You want to try to build around it, and then it just falls on its face.
Yes, every single time. Except for the time when Blake Rasmussen from Wizards of the Coast trashed me with this card. I was like, oh, so it can work sometimes. Interesting, as my library was getting milled out from fleeting memories. I'm just like, this is embarrassing. Obsessive Skinner.
Love that card.
That's a good card. Now, how does it rank against the cards that we've already got? Like, do you like it better than Murderous Compulsion, for example?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
I do too. Skin Dog's sweet. Our last uncommon, or is it? Inner Struggle.
It's fine. I like that it's instant. It kills a lot of stuff. It doesn't kill Thornhide Wolves, though.
No, it doesn't. Still, Obsessive Skinner's better, right?
Yes.
Our double-faced... Ooh. All right. One of our double-faced cards...
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
That means we have a foil. Gatstaff Arsonist.
Oh, bleh.
All right. That's enough said. Our regular rare is Corrupted Graphstone. All right. Now, this is actually sweet. So we got a foil mythic rare. It's Startled Awake.
Ooh.
Yeah. So two blue, mill them for 13 and it can come back. It looks great in foil, though. It looks like it has a little ding in the corner.
Marshall, I can't see it. You'll have to tell me how great it looks.
It looks sweet. I mean, these foil double face cards are dope. You know what I'm gonna do? Actually, can I get one from you, Kenji? Just a real.
What? What do you
get the
sleeve?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
And I'm immediately grabbing one right now because we give these away to the listeners,
Yep,
to the patrons. So I want to make sure that it stays pristine. Now, this is actually a card we're going to talk about during the Sunset Show. And it's funny. It's powerful. It is a powerful effect, but, I'm not a huge fan of it, actually. It's not a card like I would take Obsessive Skinner over it all day long. For example, it's the kind of card that I actually prefer in my sideboard, which is weird. And I mean that. I mean like a card I intend to bring in against the right matchup, because against the right matchup, it's actually quite good. But that matchup doesn't always happen when your opponent's playing, whatever red-green is werewolves is a good example. But also I was thinking of red-black vampires or anything like that. Startled Awake just looks terrible in your hand.
Mm-hmm. Just more aggressive decks can easily overwhelm you. Plus, a lot of times you're enabling Delirium or other cards that have graveyard shenanigans. So it can be a double-edged sword. I think it's good enough, though. I think it's good enough.
Are you going to take it over Obsessive Skinner?
Yes.
Oh, doing it. I love it. I'm slamming the Skin Dog here and throwing counters around. Oh, that's sweet. I'm glad you took it. All right. Well, you can look for I do a poll. I think I'm actually going to start moving some of these to the Patreon page. There's like a kind of a blog style thing on Patreon where when I put a post up, I can decide if it's open to everybody or if it's only for patrons or, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm going to start putting the poll of the week on that page, because I think that's a kind of cool to be able to point people over to that. The thing is, I have a blog on my website, on lrcast.com, but I don't want to shut that down because I don't like I like being independent. I don't like linking my stuff to other stuff too much, just in case, something changes down the line. But I think I'm going to start using Patreon for those regular updates.
Yeah, well, you are a strong, independent Magic player, Marshall. I think you should do it.
Thank you. Okay, so there's our Crack-A-Pack. Let's get into the Sunset Show. This is a fun one. Shadows over Innistrad was quite popular, and it was definitely a good set, in my opinion. So let's get into some of these. Calling them awards is probably a little bit strong, but you know what I mean. So the first one is, if you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be? And it's funny, I said value over time.
Marshall, that's more than one word.
Yeah. No.
Sentence.
One sentence. Yeah. All right. It was a very short sentence, though. But yeah, for me, I learned a lot, and I'm going to talk about this near the end, but, about timing and about a delayed, get it, like clues, right? Like, you don't get a card right away. You have to invest mana and get it later. But does that actually translate to something that I'm interested in doing? Is it good? How good is it? Is it bad? How bad is it? That kind of thing. And that's what I think of, when I think of Shadows over Innistrad, or the things that kind of occurred to me about the questions coming into the format and then how we got those answers. Do you have anything for, what do you think of when you think of the Shadows over Innistrad?
No, I'm actually on board completely with you. Value. This is one of the sets where it's not so synergistic based, although there are plenty of decks that are very synergistic. I think just getting raw value is super sweet here, and it's a thing that most players do when they draft this format or play this, in any limited environment.
Yeah, for sure. What turned out to be the best archetypes, in your opinion?
Favorite or best?
No, the best. I want to look back and say, let's say in a couple of years, you've got a friend who's been drafting for a year and a half, and they say, hey, they're doing these flashbacks of the Shadows over whatever drafts on Magic Online. Kenji, help me out, man. What are the best decks to draft?
I would say the blue-green clues deck is probably the best when it comes together. A lot of your cards are uncommon, unfortunately, so it can be a little bit harder to pick them up. But if nobody is, and a lot of times if it's like an older format, people don't realize how good they are. You can get them. Otherwise, if that's not necessarily open, you turn more into a blue-green value deck like we were talking, which is fine, but I don't think is the best. I think just raw, maybe the white-black deck is probably good. White-black Delirium is quite nice when it comes together. I think green-white Humans is also pretty good.
What did that deck look like for you? Because, when I looked through the actual cards, there were very, very few actual human synergies in this set. There was like True Faith Sensor, Intrepid Provisioner.
Yes.
Question mark? The rare equipment. I mean, there was really not a whole lot there, right? As far as like rewarding you specifically for drafting humans, it was more just what like green, white, like there was the double strike guy, which is kind of a thing, there was a few little pop-ups here and there, but it wasn't, there's decks that we've seen that really reward you, think of like Devoid or, whenever you cast a colorless spell and you're just like every card in my deck must be colorless. I will accept nothing else. This wasn't like that, the humans deck. It was a little more just kind of aggressive-ish, mid-range-ish type deck, right?
Marshall, you're forgetting equestrian skill. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times you just had things like wolves and random spirits and stuff. It was just good cards, not necessarily human. Very, very infrequently would you have just a core human deck that was like, oh man, this is really ticking. Oh, I'm doing all these human things.
Yeah,
totally. No, not at all.
But that deck was definitely good. It was on my list for sure. One of the decks that I really liked, I feel like it's underrated, though I don't know if I would quite put it on this level, is the blue-white Tempo Flyers deck. I still think that deck's really good. I drafted it a bunch at the beginning and a little bit less later on, but I still get tweets and stuff from people saying, hey, I tried out your deck. It's really good. And somehow it became my deck, but whatever. I think that deck is very good. If you draft it correctly, it has a few kind of unintuitive picks in it, but otherwise I think it's good. Where are you at on blue-red spells?
I think, again,
is it too cute or is it just good?
I think it's cute. I think it's, again, very dependent on specific cards. You want to get things like Rise from the Tides, lots of, you don't end up with many creatures as a thing. Like the deck says, you're mainly spells. Maybe you have some Pyre Hounds that can get really large, but if your opponent has key removal or key interaction at specific times, you're really sitting in a bad position.
Yeah. I've found that deck to be not tier 1 as far as like the deck that you want. Again, it's kind of hard to say, right? Because if I handed you a great version of a blue-red spells deck, it is going to be really good. Like that deck was hard to interact with for your average limited deck because it did have so many spells, and so many limited decks are geared towards creature combat. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like you said, if disrupted, it could get really disrupted. And I think that did definitely take a little bit of a hit. You talked about white-black Delirium. Luis was on green-white Delirium early in the format. And I have to agree. I think green-white with some black or any combination of those three where one of the colors is getting splashed ended up being quite strong. And a deck that I found myself going back to over and over again. It kind of had the core of green and white cards that I liked just for power level reasons, solitary hunters and things like that are like just good cards. Mm-hmm. And then also gave you this extra ability to sometimes go really deep, right? And, you could pick up a bunch of Vessel of Nascencies, maybe even do the whole golem thing, and kind of go off with the, I get to set up my draw step, if the game went super long. But if it didn't, you were okay. You got to take some really solid Delirium cards, like Tooth Collector and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think that deck just had a good floor and a very high ceiling. And that's definitely something I look for when I'm drafting.
Yeah, I agree. I think the black-white version and more specifically the green-black version are the best. I generally tried not to splash too much, but you're right. There are a lot of powerful cards that, you could just put in the deck and they would have synergy and work out. What
was the worst archetype you actually drafted? And we put the word archetype in air quotes here too, just in case it didn't end up being an actual thing.
I really disliked white-red. White-red was just bad for me. Aggressive decks, especially. You have like Nahiri's, is it Machinations?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or Nahiri herself. And like you always wanted to build around these cards, but it didn't seem to click. Your white creatures were doing okay things. Maybe you're playing some like Cathar's Companions because you needed to, but then the white cards weren't exactly meshing well the red cards weren't meshing well with the white cards. It just felt so awkward, and I never ended up getting a good sense of that deck.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a good version of it in my first pre-release limited experience. And what I did is I was looking at Stern Constable, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to find out if this card's good or not. And so I took like 3 of them or whatever, and I played the Madness cards out of red. And I was like, this deck is unbelievable, because when you go turn 1, Stern Constable, and then turn 2, you play a Blood Mad Vampire and tap down their threat and then hit them with Blood Mad Vampire.
Oh, sure.
It's like all of a sudden you feel like you're just the king of the world. And, I was doing this with stupid, incorrigible youths and stupid stuff like that. And there it's great. But I have to say, I was not able to replicate that sense. Maybe a little fraction of it, but I think I just ran really well, like drew the things in the right order, in the right sequence against the right matchup, and it made it look really good. But thankfully, as a listener of limited resources, I knew that was just one data point, and I didn't get too excited about it where I was like, I broke the format. I just thought, well, there's some really good interactions here, and this might be a real thing. But I kind of agree with you. It never ended up being a thing that was consistent enough that I wanted to go for it. And I always felt like I'd rather be doing whatever my opponent's doing every time I tried a green-white aggro deck. And so I stopped drafting it.
Yeah. For you Community Super League listeners out there, Stern Constable, Aaron Forsyth, of course. But yes. A lot of the Madness cards you mentioned, though, like the Blood Mad Vampire was the one that you could probably pick up the easiest. Cards like Fiery Temper and Malevolent Whispers, those were all cards that generally got picked up early or were uncommon. So it was harder to pick those things up, and I don't know, it just didn't seem to work out well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's one of the threads I see popping up here too is that the uncommons were very strong in this set, and there were some that really helped define things as far as how good your deck was and what direction it could go. And that's kind of a scary spot to be in. I prefer decks that are built primarily around commons, and then maybe you get a little power spike here or there from an uncommon or a rare. But there were some really important uncommons in the set, and that definitely dictated a lot about that. I tried to draft red-black control once, and you think, like, I kind of fell into it because I just kept getting removal. It was like, fiery temper, murderous compulsion. And I'm like, okay, throttle, I'm like, oh, I've got all the removal. This is great. But the problem is that even as a control deck or as a deck that's playing that much removal, especially some of the more reactive removal, like the murderous compulsions and such, you need, some nice big beefers to get in there and kind of clean up the mess. And I found it difficult to make that work. I had a bunch of stupid, small creatures that I didn't want to run in a shell like this. And, I would not recommend red-black control. I think it's better to just beat down if you can do it.
Playing like 3 Vampire Nobles. Nice deck, Marshall.
Yeah, exactly. All right, this is a fun one. I love this one. Kenji, what was a funky rare that you always hoped to see, that you would open it up and be like, yes, we did it. I'm building around this thing.
Tamiyo's Journal, man.
Oh yeah,
I've got a crush on that card.
That
so
card's
hard.
Great.
Just because I loved building, like we were talking about, the Clue deck, and more specifically the blue-green Clue deck. That deck is always going to have a soft spot in my heart these days.
Oh yeah.
You have things like Ongoing Investigation, Graph Moles, just all of the investigators, whatever they're called.
I like investigationers.
The things that make clues. You know what I'm talking about, man.
Yep.
And Tamiyo's Journal, it was so good. Like, yes, it's a 5-mana artifact that doesn't immediately do anything by itself, but first upkeep, hey, you get a clue. Do you already have some clues? You get a tutor. It was dirtily, but it felt so good to kind of build your deck around it and get the synergies. Yeah,
and I love that you picked it for this particular category because of the fact that opening it and taking it let you do that, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you got it in the third pack, you're looking at it like, there's a decent card here for my deck where I could take this Tamiyo's Journal and I want to take the journal. But then if you look at the deck that you've already drafted, sometimes you look and you're like, I've just got this sort of, medium aggro, kind of mid-range deck, and you start looking at cards that you just don't want in your list at all. If you're going to try to play a Tamiyo's Journal style deck, because, Tamiyo's Journal is about going long game, getting all that advantage and sort of mopping it up after the game, after you've stabilized the board. But when you first pick it, even though it has those downsides that you described, you get to just build around it. You're just like, well, whatever. I'm playing all these defensive creatures. It doesn't matter that it doesn't do anything because it's going to take over the long game. Yeah, that card was sweet. The one I picked, I had a few. Thing in the Eye, Seasons Past came to mind, but the one I really want, Get Rog Monster. Exactly. Oh my God. I mean, there are few better feelings in Limited than getting the Get Rog Monster down, starting the chain, and especially if you can do the groundskeeper nonsense with it. And, you got the big bad frog sitting there kind of holding off the ground because it's so hard to attack into while you're just drawing all these cards and your opponent has to just sit there. I love that. Yeah, Get Rug Monster. That was my guy. One flap up. This is a good one. What was the most number of times that you investigated in one game, and did you deck yourself? Now, I've got a write-in answer from Luis here. He says probably around 12 times. He did not deck himself that time, but he has over-investigated before. What was your answer for this? Do you remember how many you've done?
I couldn't put a number on it.
Yeah.
I just put 10 question mark, but it was definitely a ton because I favored the investigate deck a lot. I would, force it a lot. And as such, I had opportunities just to make so many clues. And I don't know. I've definitely decked myself doing this, though. Not only because you're drawing so many cards, but you're playing cards like Crawling Sensation and whatnot. So you're just you're going through your deck so quickly, no matter what. And it feels good, Marshall, when you do.
It's funny. I had the similar experience that both Luis and you had, which is that the time when I peaked on number of times, cracking clues, which I think is about yours. I think it was probably in the 9 to 11 range, like somewhere right there. I won that game. But I did also deck myself on a separate occasion where I don't think I cracked quite as many clues, like maybe 6 or 7. But I had my 2 win conditions killed, and I'm like, and it was one of those games where my opponent had 8 creatures and I had 9 or whatever, and I'm just looking at it like, I don't have a way to win the game. And I'm just like, I just keep drawing cards because it's not going to change anything. I was already way ahead of my opponent on cards, so I wasn't going to be able to deck them. And I'm just like, yeah, no, there's just nothing here.
That's always the worst.
It's kind of the best and the worst, though.
Like you see an epitaph goal and you're like, well, I might be able to get it back later, so I don't deck. And then you just don't get it.
And then you don't get it. Yep. This is an interesting one. Which cards were you most wrong about during the set reviews, and which cards really surprised you one way or the other? So, rewind here, transport yourself back in time, Kenji, to before the set came out. And I know that you're actually not a big spoiler person, right? Like you tend to kind of let the cards come to you when you first start playing.
Correct. I used to be huge on spoilers and previews and looking, each card as it came through, but nowadays, I just wait until it comes out online to really get a feel for them. It's
too easy for you otherwise. I get it. But did you get a sense? I mean, I'm sure that you still see some of these cards just randomly on Twitter and whatnot, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Surprised me one way. I think Ulrich's Kindred was one for myself specifically. 3/2 trample for 3, and then you can pay a green and 3 colors to give target attacking wolf or werewolf indestructible until end of turn.
Yeah,
I didn't think it was going to be as good. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was going to be as good in that particular deck. It just makes combat so rough versus the opponent, or so rough for them if you control it. And a 3-mana 3/2 is not the worst of stats. It has trample natively, so any pump effects you're generally going to get damage through. I think that was one card that kind of overperformed for me.
Vessel of Nascency was one that Luis and I were very medium on. Like we've seen cards like this time and time again in Limited, right? Your Commune with the Gods, Seek the Wilds or whatever it was called. All those type of cards, they're all right? Like it's not that you can't play them. If you do, it's like, okay, sure, whatever. You played a Seek the Wilds, it's fine. But that's never what you want to be doing, right? You'd rather just have that be a good card and not spin your wheels, spending all that mana and tempo, just to replace itself with something else. But, and so I think when I saw Vessel of Nascency, and I previewed this, by the way, I mean, sure, I saw the whole Delirium thing. I mentioned it in the article. But for whatever reason, the card just overperformed. I think part of it was the installment plan. Getting to do something on turn 1 in a format that you in Limited is a nice thing because you often don't. And then when you were ready to crack the Vessel, you could. It was like you could play it on turn 1, then play a creature on turn 2 and turn 3, and then maybe play like a 2-drop and crack your Vessel or something along those lines. And if you were doing the Delirium thing, I mean, it almost immediately gets you Delirium, right? It's basically 3 of your 4 Delirium every single time. And the times when it's not, it's usually all 4. Like you just did it. And the thing about it is it also had this weird synergy where it fills up your graveyard pretty fast too. And when you're doing the Epitaph Golem nonsense, you actually do want to get your graveyard filled up. Same thing with, cards like Crawling Sensation that you mentioned earlier. You can get that value. And that card crept up on me. The other one that I'm just like shocked at how much I like and think and how good I think this card is Thraben Inspector.
Yeah.
It just looks so minimal, right? Like when you see it, you're like, you play it, it's a stupid 1/2. That's very shrug worthy, right? Like that's not a big deal in Limited. It's kind of a half a card or something like that, maybe 2/3 of a card. And then you get a clue and it's like, okay, well, so it's going to replace itself eventually, right? You're like, it takes a while. None of these things jump off the table, but my God, like every time I play that card on turn 1, I feel like, well, that's game. Let's just move on to game 2 because I just played a Thraben Inspector. When my opponent does, I'm like, no, oh no, like this is not going to go well. That card has skyrocketed for me from being something that I thought was kind of like, maybe you'll play it sometimes. I don't know. It's filler or whatever, to a card that I really want in my deck.
No, I still completely undervalue the card, and I know how good it is now. The thing is, it's all of the small components put together into this weird package that makes it something very, very good. It's cheap. It's a 1/2 for 1. It cycles itself eventually. It's just so weird. You don't think at first glance, oh, this is going to do anything, but it ends up being really solid.
And that moves us to what were the most underrated cards. And top of my list is Thraben Inspector. Look, people figured it out. I'm not trying to say that we're the only ones who know that Thraben Inspector is actually a very good card, but still, I think that people didn't properly give that card its due, and I do think that it's still a bit underrated.
Agreed.
What else do you have for underrated?
Moldgraph Scavenger for myself. That's the 1 green colorless 0/4. Yeah, the Goyf. Delirium, it gets +3/+0. That card just did overtime work. It blocks most things early.
Yep.
And later in the game, it's relevant body size, +4 toughness, 3 power. That's actually quite decent in this format.
Oh, it hit a nice sweet spot for sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many X3s or just 3/3s in general, and it eats all of them. It blocks all of them. I think that card was something that was completely underrated. And then, as the format progressed, well, just like the Thraben Inspector, you saw them less and less later on.
Yeah, for sure. Another card that I thought was very underrated, and maybe even say that way, was Jace's Scrutiny. Mm-hmm. 1 and a blue instant, target creature gets -4/-0 until end of turn, and you get a clue. It's like, God, it's so funny because all the things I just said about Vessel of Nascency, same thing, right? We've seen these cards. We know what these cards do, right? There's often this stupid blue shrink down the power of your creature, and everybody always thinks, well, this is a good card because your opponent will attack, then you shrink it and you can double block or triple block and kill their creature. And the truth is that it almost never plays out that way because people don't attack into 3 creatures with 1 creature. They just don't do it very often. And so getting those situations set up is always a lot more difficult than people give it credit for, and hence those cards never see play. They just don't see play. They're generally bad. But Jace's Scrutiny was the big question mark. We get the card back after it. Does that bring that type of effect up to speed? And I think 2 things happened. 1, yes, it does. It just does. Like when you get that card, when it's just a tempo hit of a total of 4 mana, but you get to draw a card off of it. That's a big deal. And 2, it turned out that this set ended up being way more combat tricky than it looked like on the surface. People loved playing combat tricks in this format. And my God, you could get a 2-for-1 off of Jace's Scrutiny so easily when your opponent's just like attack with this thing into your bigger creature, and you're just like block, and they're like, pump it, shrink it down a bunch. Your creature dies, and they just got completely blown out, right? I mean, that happens all the time.
Oh, so, that still happens to me all the time, too.
Yeah, it does, right? It's hard to play around that card, The other one was True Faith Sensor. I think that it kind of got thrown into the pile of equipment. It's like, oh, there's a True Face Sensor and there's this Shard of Broken Glass, and then there's a couple of uncommons, and it's like, yeah, whatever, they all seem okay. Like none of them jumped off the screen as like, oh, wow, they really pushed the boundaries with this one. But man, I got to say, True Face Sensor really pulled its weight for me. That was a card that I went from kind of overlooking early to, and I felt was, shrug, to a card that I think is now underrated and quite good. I think True Face Sensor was very, very solid equipment for, at the common level.
I agree. I think it's the vigilance that really makes it for me. It doesn't have to be a human to get the vigilance. Of course, if it's a human to get an additional power boost, but it's also, it's kind of cheap to equip, right? 2 is not too expensive. You think of equipment, you see 3 to equip, you're like, that's pretty expensive. It better be like a Loxodon Warhammer type effect. But 2 is a sweet spot. 1 is like very, very good, which is why I think the Neglected Heirloom is just good by itself, even if you don't have any cards that can transform. And so Truth Face Sensor is a nice little sweet spot in between that. Yeah,
for sure. And then the random bonus for the humans, always welcome. And that was one of the times when you're actually looking, and again, you look at a Thraben Inspector, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 3/3 vigilance, anybody? Like that's insane, right? Like that is where those things start to really shine. Let's talk about the overrated cards. So let's talk about some of those. Luis actually put this one down, and I totally agreed with him. Reduce to Ashes. I think Throttle goes on the list too. You could probably make a case for sleep paralysis or something, but these 5 mana removal spells, really Reduced to Ashes is kind of the poster child for this though. Sorcery speed. Look, you will play one. It's not that it's a terrible card or something. It's just people view this as removal, like card you need to take really early in a pack because, hey, it's removal. I don't think it, I think it's worse than that. And I think that anybody who's putting in that top tier or that upper tier of pick based on the fact that it's red removal and you need it, is probably overrating it and should approach the format from a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah, we're always told that you take the removal highly, and this on the surface looks like a very, very good one. It's fine. Like you mentioned, running one is not the end of the world, but it just feels so clunky in this format. It's a sorcery. Yeah, you're ending up killing a 3/3 with it a lot of the times or something like that, and you're just like, I guess I'll have to spend my turn to kill their 3-drop, 4-drop. It just feels terrible. And it's all about perspective and what the format you're playing is.
Yeah, for sure. And for whatever reason, it just doesn't fit. I mean, look, I talk about necessary evils a lot, right? Which is when it comes to removal, because, when I first started playing draft, the removal looked a lot different than it does now. In fact, I wrote an entire column about how much the removal had changed over the previous, 4 to 5 years or whatever. And, especially at the common slot where we used to have insane removal at common, and now we don't. And, part of the adjustment that you make is, well, you just have to suck it up and take a throttle and play it, even though you're used to getting that for 2 mana or 3 mana. But the other part of it is that you adjust your game plan, right? You also say, well, I don't have to just take this removal and play it and just be sad that it costs more mana. You can also say, well, I'm going to not fall into that trap of doing like what you said, where you're like, here's my 5 mana sorcery speed spell. I'll kill your 3-drop. Yeah. Take 2 from your 2, and you can opt out. You can not play that game or only play it when you feel like you need to, I think, to a point. And I think Reduced to Ashes, again, is kind of the poster child. What did you have for most overrated card?
I put Skin Invasion. I'm still kind of on the fence about this card. I think in the correct deck, and I don't even know what deck that is, it's okay, but man, that card just feels so weird to me. Like, you put it on their creature, and if you have a bigger creature to block, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna eat their dude and get a 3/4. But then you can get blown out, right? They can kill your creature, they can have a trick or whatnot. I still just don't know how to rate this card. A lot of the times you end up putting it on your own, like Insolent Neonate to get the value. But what if you don't draw your Insolent Neonate? Or what if you draw this card, your opponent has a creature, and you don't have anything? I just don't know how to rate the Skin Invasion.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I agree. I think that the upside is reasonable, but the downside is very low. I had my opponent put it on their own creature, and I just looked at my hand and looked at the board, and I'm like, no blocks. And I said, we're just racing now, and they died with their own creature having Skin Invasion and becoming a complete liability for them. Like the fact that it must attack every turn screwed them. I mean, they needed to keep that creature back on blocks, but they read the situation at the moment as, if I put Skin Invasion on, my opponent is really going to be compelled to block. And I just looked at it and I said, I'm just not compelled. Like I can chump block that thing, or, I can race you. And I had a lot more information about that decision than my opponent did, as it turned out. I could see my hand. They couldn't. So, risky stuff. And whenever you introduce that level of risk to a card, you're definitely, I think you're lowering its average, how good it is on average.
Agreed, completely.
Another one is Startled Awake. I think that we talked about it earlier for our Cracker Pack, because we got this foil one here. But, that card, I heard people calling it a bomb. I heard people, in the early format just saying it was unbeatable and all this stuff. And I'm just like, really? It's a mythic rare, so I hadn't got to play with it much at all. Maybe seen a match with it, maybe had it once. I can't remember. But again, going back to the sample size thing, I didn't really have one to speak of. But, I heard like actual Magic players saying, oh no, that card's insane. Like, you have to just take it. I'm just looking at it like, I don't see it, but I'm willing to be wrong, because it's such a weird card, right? Like, it's such a uniquely strange. It's a sorcery that like comes back as, a creature, and it does all this weird stuff. But, overall, I talked to some more people, and I had a little bit more experience with it, and I never came around. I think that if you think that the card's a bomb, I think you're wrong. I don't think that it is. And like I said earlier, I think it actually belongs more in the sideboard than anywhere else.
I think it's a bomb in the sense that it can kill so quickly left unchecked, which is, 3 turns? You cast it turn 4.
Usually the second time you cast it will win you the game, because, you're 11 cards into your library, theoretically, on turn 4.
Yes.
Right. And so, if you're 11, then that leaves you with, 29 cards, right? And if you're going to cast it twice over the next 2 turns, then that's 2 more cards plus the 26. So that leaves them with 2 cards left. So you should win that game, I'd assume.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's, and again, there are very, very polar opinions on this, like you had mentioned. I think it is good, though.
Okay. You know, the one exception that people did bring up pretty consistently, and I had to agree with, was Geist flaming it. Geist blasting it.
Geist blasting.
Flashing back a Geist blast on your Startle Awake, because that's basically a win immediately.
Oh, but that was their reasoning?
Well, they were saying, I was saying, it's not quite as good. Yeah, but what if you get to Geist blast it? And like, well, that's a win. Like if you've got 2 Geist blasts and a Startled Awake or something like that, I can see a bigger argument for valuing it higher than I do. Just because you can set up a situation not too difficult, right? You need to get up to 7 mana and then you're just like, you're dead.
Sure, but then you're banking on getting a mythic rare and an uncommon. I don't think those arguments are very good.
No, what I mean is that I think the argument was more that I said, look, you can win the game with this, but it's a lot touchier than you think if you're under any pressure. It sucks. There's a lot to not like about it. And they're saying, well, what pushes me over the boundary is I can do these things on the base level. Right? Like sometimes it just wins the game. If you're in a stall out and you're just like Startle Awake, hit it back, hit you, Startle Awake, you're dead. That does happen occasionally, right? I don't want to take that away from the card. It does have that. That's what you like about it, right? Like against a slow opponent or against a stall out, against certain color pairs, it can do some serious work. I think they were saying more like if you can assemble this combo, then it pushes it over the edge where you're getting that sort of, I don't want to call it free equity, but the built-in equity of beating the slow decks and stuff. But then you can also pop this thing off against something, a little bit more assertive and actually get there. But you're of course right that like that's not a reason to take the card. It's just sort of a wrinkle that added an extra level of power to it.
I suppose that makes sense.
Overrated cards.
No, don't do it.
Sanitarium skeleton.
Janitor?
Anybody? So you and I had a discussion on we were the first people in public to play with Sanitarium skeleton. And we immediately were like, I was like, that card's not that good. And you're like, it's great. And I'm like, it's not that good. And I remember you were using it to keep equipping the murderer's axe.
Yeah.
And you're like, look how good this is. I'm like, dude, that's not that good. I'm like, you're paying 4 mana to and you're like, yeah, whatever. It was pretty funny. So where did we end up coming down on this? Because this was a card that I think we all saw, okay, I could see how this could be a thing, but is it a thing in the format enough was the question. And where did you end up coming down on the old Sanitarium skeleton?
I think it's a role player. It definitely doesn't go into every deck, but in decks that do want to abuse the graveyard or do want to discard a lot of cards, yeah, I think this is perfectly fine, especially with Call the Bloodline.
Yeah, that I like. That was actually where I really dug it, was with Call the Bloodline. In all the other scenarios, I found it, like, it did touch into playability for me. Like, for sure, I would be like, okay, I'll take one of these. But I never liked it. I never thought it was a key piece or something that I needed outside of Call the Bloodline. I really did like it with Call the Bloodline, because that's pretty sweet. But I think it's just too expensive to get back. That's just the hard part, is just carving out all that mana was really difficult.
I agree. It's a role player, and sometimes you just bring it in if your opponent's playing some big fatties that you just need to block. It's like a 1/2 with 4 mana to regenerate. So
exactly. What were the most controversial cards?
What do you think? What's your number one most controversial?
Well, so the one that jumps to mind for me was Fevered Visions. Okay. And yeah, because Fevered Visions, it was very difficult to grade. Because it's so weird with the timing. Like, you get the card right away. They don't get it till their end step. Is it an actual win condition? Do they just kill you with the cards that they get? How does this all actually play out? And I remember that early in the format, Luis and I had a discussion about it where we were kind of like both not really sure exactly. But then he had seen it in the early drafts, and I gave it a low grade. I think I gave it a D+ or something. No, that's not a low grade, but I gave it sometimes you'll put this card in your deck type grade. And maybe I gave it a D. I don't remember. But anyway, and he was like, no, he said that I was going to change my mind and that it was a much, much better card than that. And I mean, of course I hadn't played with it, so I didn't know. I did not change my mind.
Still think it's not very good?
I still think it's not very good. I have seen decks where I think it's very good. So maybe it goes into a similar camp to like Sanitarium Skeleton, where like, it's a role player in the right deck. that's great, right? I mean, I have seen these type of decks that are, I'm just like, oh my God, like they've got 2 of these and it's just really scary. But I do not just put this card into every blue-red deck I play. I'll tell you that. It's not just like an automatic include for me at all. And it's not a card that I prioritize in the draft, even if I'm playing blue-red or, in these colors. I don't splash for it. It's just one of those cards that I've beaten too many times, to be honest. Like every time my opponent plays it, I feel like, oh, that's not that bad. Like I'll probably beat that card. I get all these extra cards. I'm probably going to get them. So I'm not a big fan of it, but I do definitely see the spot for it. I think that's the key with cards like this, is to find the right home, because I do not think that it fits into the category of just outright power level where it just holds its own. You just play it and you're like, sweet, this card's awesome, we're done here. I think you need to make sure that you build around it and find the right home. And I think if you do, it rewards you.
Mm-hmm. It does. It's one of those, it is very, very weird. It's a unique ability. It's not one that it's hard to build around, honestly. Like
yes.
It's a rare. It has this weird ability like you were talking about. You do draw the card immediately, but it also gives your opponents extra cards. And while 2 damage is not insignificant, those extra cards can definitely be a problem, especially if they're on a more aggressive deck where they can just dump their hand.
Exactly. Or, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I looked at it like, oh, they play Fever Visions. And I'm like, oh, no. Oh, okay. Well, attack for 4. Right. And they're like, have nothing on board. And I'm like, draw some extra, play a creature, draw some extra cards. Like, sure, I'll take 2, whatever. Right. What are you going to do now? Like, I've got 3 creatures out. You just spent your whole turn casting nothing. Right. It's like, I find those cards, like, they have a very, very steep hill to climb and they have to do really powerful stuff. Same argument against Startled Awake. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, it's not that it doesn't have an effect on the game. It just doesn't affect the board. And that's just a very steep hill to climb for a card to come out to be really great.
Yeah, for sure. One of those enchantments that's, I think, one of the controversial ones as well is Triskaidekaphobia.
Oh, God.
And, you still hear people.
To me.
Triskaidekaphobia.
I lost to that. So I put up multiple videos on Channel Fireball and I lost to my own Triskaidekaphobia.
Marshall, please.
Like, I lost a game to it. And I was like, whatever, I screwed up, or, something weird happened. And then like 2 drafts later, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do it. I don't care. I'm taking another Triskaidekaphobia. And then I got another one. I had 2 in the same deck.
Oh, jeez.
And then I played it in like, my opponent was at 14 and I'm at like 18 or something. Like, this is good. We're fine. And then they played Avacyn's Judgment. Avacyn's Judgment. Like, they can just change life totals at will. They can just like bring mine down, bring theirs down. I'm just like, I'm like, okay, well, that was unlucky. Ran it back, did it again. They have this Judgment me again. And I'm like, I'm never touching Triskaidekaphobia again. I'm off it.
Let me tell you a short abridged story of Triskaidekaphobia.
Yes. Please do.
You say your loss was bad. Well, I had Triskaidekaphobia, 2 of them, in fact, in one of my decks. This was at a GP. We were in round 15. I was playing my Winning in for top 8. Game 1. I jammed Triskaidekaphobia. At some point on my upkeep, trigger on the stack, Fiery Temper, they lose because they were at 16 and then 13. Okay. And I'm like, yes, up a game, playing for top 8. I have 2 Triskaidekaphobia in my deck. The next game, I get rolled. Whatever, I didn't cast Triskaidekaphobia. Game 3, I cast Triskaidekaphobia. I'm like, yes, we're going to do it. Opponent plays Westvale Abbey, Marshall. Westvale Abbey. So on a whim, they can pay 1 life.
Anytime they want.
To put a creature out. And I'm just like, and then I just died to my own Triskaidekaphobia.
That is awesome.
That's terrible.
So we don't like Triskaidekaphobia, you and I. We're anti. I'm suddenly getting antsy at the thought of the number 13.
I like the card.
You're crazy.
I like the card, but
I don't. I hate that card. Hate.
Controversial.
Yes, exactly. What were some of the notable first picks that could really set the course for your draft? You first pick it and you're like, all right, we're doing it. This is the plan.
I feel like I've driven this point into the ground by now, but Grafmole, Call the Bloodline, Old and Wild Mysteries, Ongoing Investigations.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, those cards, they taste so good in my hand when I play them.
Totally. And they do. They put you in the mindset, oh, we're going to build the glue deck, right? We're building the glue deck. And these cards all, contribute significantly to that. And they belong on this list. Yeah. The one that came to mind for me was Thing in the Ice. Because, because you do need to, like, if you first pick a thing in the ice and then just draft a normal blue whatever deck, like that thing might not ever flip, right? True. Like you do need a decent number of instants and sorceries to actually, you have to cast 4 of them to get the thing to flip. There's a lot of decks that don't even have 4 total, so, you want to really get that number up there. And when you do, Thing in the Ice is unbelievable. Like when you actually get to flip it over. So that was one that always came to mind for me, that I would be like, all right, we're doing it. We're turning this thing into an Awoken Horror.
Good call.
What was the biggest groan test?
Duskwatch Recruiter.
Oh God.
Just the name, Duskwatch.
Oh my God. They play that on turn 2. It's been a while since we've had a groan test as big as Dusky, right? They play it on turn 2 and you're like, no, I was going to win this game.
Do I have dead weight? Do I have anything? What do oh God.
Dead weight in a Duskwatch Recruiter has to be one of the best feelings possible, by the way. You feel it felt like when you got to like Electrickery of Pack Rat or something, right? Where you're like, we did it! Kill a Drana in Rise of the Eldrazi Trap. Like,
Flame Slash?
You had the Flame Slash. It all came together. Duskwatch Recruiter, when you got to kill that little bastard on turn 2, was one of the most relieving feelings you could. And it just never happened enough.
No. The worst part is, it's insane on turn 2, and then it's insane on turn 8. And
I know. No matter when they cast it, it elicited the full groan.
Yeah.
Great call. Any honorable mentions for biggest groan test?
I had Uncaged Fury on that because that.
You're right.
Double strike. You're just like, I was totally at 10. Right. I'm about to take 4 and then kill him on the backswing. Okay. Oh,
yes.
It's just like,
That's right. It was always the situation where you're like, okay, the only card that kills me is Uncaged Fury, but I'm not going to block because I win, right? Otherwise, and I lose to all these other cards if they have that and I block, right? So I don't block, and then boom, they have it. You're like, no. And that was like the only card in the set that could kill you or whatever, right? How many times have you heard that bad beat story?
At the pre-release, remember, Graham?
Oh, yeah.
With Grotesque Mutation.
Oh, yeah, I remember. All right. What was the most frustrating bad card to lose to? I put that in quotes, right? The card you're not going to miss playing against, or that really annoyed the crap out of you.
Mine personally was Runaway Carriage.
Wait, did you lose to Runaway Carriage?
Oh, I've lost to that card plenty, Marshall. Uncommon artifact creature. It's like a 5/6 trample. And then when it attacks or blocks, sacrifice at end of combat. It cost 4, so it's a creature and artifact for delirium purposes, but you're just like, really? Did you ball lightning me and I'm going to lose in limited? And
oh, man. The funny part is, like, it's this ball lightning that helps you with this long-term grindy strategy. Like, how does that, like, I guess you just block with it, but still it felt like it was at odds with itself a little bit. Yeah. A couple of cards came to mind for me. One of them was Dissension in the Ranks, which is that, 3 red instant and 2 target blocking creatures fight each other or whatever it did. That never happened though, right?
I don't think I've ever seen that card cast. I just think it's unplayable.
I think so too. But that would have been definitely on the list if it ever happened. Here's another one for you. Equestrian Skull. Come on. There is no way. I remember losing. Here's what I lost in the first game to an Equestrian Skill, and I'm like, oh, I am not I was just like, I am 2-0ing from here. I'm not losing to Equestrian Skill. And I didn't. Thank you. I did not. It was like Just the Wind, Mangler, Taste It. I don't care. It was one of those things where when they played it in the first game, I'm like, this is very good news. Like that my opponent's playing it, though they did end up beating me with it in that game, which is pretty annoying. Okay, this is a big one, Kenji. What was the bombiest bomb, the card you wanted to open in pack 1 or see in your sealed pool?
Definitely. Well, let me tell you, it's Startle Awake, Marshall.
It is not. It's not Startle Awake.
It's Archangel.
Totally
Avacyn.
Archangel Avacyn.
Yeah, come on.
That's just one of the best limited cards we've ever seen.
one of the best constructed cards we've ever seen.
It's a very good constructed card too, but yeah, that card in limited was just completely unbeatable. There were some honorable mentions. You know, a Tireless Tracker I thought was amazing. Also a great candidate for Grown Tests, I think.
Yes.
You know,
100%.
that was like, I'm not beating that. All right. You know, there were some others, but man, Archangel Avacyn with a bullet, number one bombiest card in the set, period.
Easy.
What was the best common for each color? Now I'm going to go down the list that Luis and I settled on together. But if you would disagree with any, I'd be curious to hear, or if you have any, you know, that are close. For white, we have Angelic Purge.
Agreed.
Okay. For blue, we had Stitch Mangler.
I think that one was a little bit closer, but I do think Stitch Mangler is probably better than Jace's Scrutiny. We were talking about that earlier.
Oh, but you think Scrutiny's up there near the top?
I think, yeah. Definitely.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Black, Deadweight.
Easy.
Yep. Red, Fiery Temper.
Not close.
Okay. And what about green Rabid Bite?
Yep. Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. Okay.
Although I think Solitary Hunter is actually a decent.
Just going to bring that up. I honestly do think that as well, though I would take a Rabid Bite over it. I think Solitary Hunter is super good, like rock solid creature, right? It's not the kind of card that competes with the Mythic Uncommons or the really great power plays, but as a common and a card that you're going to see as often as the common pops up, it is great. I mean, super solid. Yeah. Hey, Kenji, what's the best uncommon?
I don't want to talk about it. Duskwatch Recruiter. Let's say it together.
Duskwatch Recruiter. Yeah, done. What's the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked. You know how it is. It's Magic Online. You see a land, you see what sitting next to it.
Easily Vessel of Volatility.
Yes,
for me
that's
at
what
least.
That's what I had too. Me too. Yeah. Totally Vessel of Volatility.
There are a ton of honorable mentions for sure, but Vessel of Volatility, nobody wants that card. Ever.
Yes. Yeah. Luis had a Brain in a Jar and Haunted Cloak as honorable mentions, but Vessel of Volatility. Congratulations, you did it. What card was the most begrudgingly playable? Luis said Ember Eye Wolf, and I actually agree with Luis because I don't think that card's good at all. But sometimes you just needed something in the 2-drop slot, which was hard to fill out, and you'd play an Ember Eye Wolf. Did you have anything that jumped out as a card you're like, fine, I'll put it in my deck?
Before we, but I think it was Cathar's Companion for me.
Oh, that's a good one.
I thought, was kind of like, I guess I'll put it in my deck. Do I have enough ways to make it so it's indestructible? Are they instant so I can kind of blow out the opponent? But it's a 3/1 for 3 otherwise. Going back to Ember Eye Wolf, I think that card's actually decent.
You would. What was that stupid card we used to fight about? Remember there was that 1-drop red card that pumped? Remember we used to fight
you're
about...
talking about Bellows Lizard.
Yeah, Bellows Lizard.
I don't think that card is good at all. I think that card is terrible.
Okay, good. Because that's not what you said at the time. I think, was it on your stream, did you first pick one just to make me mad, or you put it in your deck just to... I can't remember what the scenario was, but I remember that. No, but you think that Ember Eye Wolf's okay?
I think it's okay. It's passable.
Like a D?
Yeah,
by the way, the definition of a D for these purposes is a card that you would prefer not to play, but sometimes makes the cut.
I'd give it like a D plus.
God, you love those little dogs.
Yeah, well,
I think it's a terrible card. So bad.
It's fine.
Is there a card that you'll miss drafting? Of course there is. What card will you miss?
The most, number one, probably called the Bloodline, but
yes.
I think honorable mentions, of course, Ongoing Investigations, Graph-Mole, Open World Mysteries, all of the sweet value, clue-ish type cards are the ones that really interact with your graveyard. There's so many times, man, I just play Call the Bloodline, and it doesn't even have to be that I have Madness cards in my hand or in my deck. You know, I just end up discarding gratuitous lands or whatever. I think my most favorite moment, or I guess this happened a lot, favorite moments in this format were having Call the Bloodline, having Groundskeeper, and just getting a 1/1 every turn by discarding a land, getting it back to my hand with Groundskeeper, discarding a land. And you could do it once on your turn and once on the opponent, so it's just great.
Disgusting. Yeah, that's fantastic. Luis has a write-in answer for this one, and he really wanted me to say it. Fevered Visions. He even put an exclamation point. He loved that card. We talked about it before. I was curious to hear, maybe I'll make him tweet about it or something, about where he ended up coming down on it in the end. Again, I didn't like it at first. He liked it a lot, and I'm not sure where he ended up on it. I would assume that he came down a little bit, but ended up being somewhere where I am, where like in the right deck, he's really excited about it, but it's not just like one of those overall powerful cards. But we'll see what he wants to say about it. But I know he loved to play it. Like that's, him and I, and I'm sure you too, Kenji, have the ability to separate good from sweet.
Yes.
and Luis certainly knows how to do that. So Fevered Visions for him. For me, it was Ongoing Investigation. I mean, the card took a little bit to figure out, right? It was like, what does it do? And it was like, it has an off-color activated ability, and it's like you're getting investigating on two different things, and it was weird. But then once you started doing it, you're like, oh wait, this is just an engine. Like this thing just goes and goes and goes, and hits from two great angles. Other card, Ulvenwald Mysteries, man. That card really went up for me a lot. I didn't understand it when it first. I just couldn't figure out like, how does this actually work? And then early in the format, my opponent played it against me, and I'm like, okay, I kind of get what that card does, but I don't know how it actually like plays out in a game. And I'm like, attack, and they're just like block, 2 trades. And I'm like, wow, you're trading those creatures for those? Interesting. I don't think I would have done that. And then it trades off, and then there's like crack a clue. And I'm like, oh. I'm like now behind on board and in hand. I'm like, I get it now. and I started playing that a lot more.
Yeah. So, similar story for me on Ongoing Investigation. First time I drafted, while streaming, I had built the sickest clue deck, and I had Ongoing Investigation in my sideboard, and everybody was like, dude, you need to submit it with Ongoing Investigation. What are you doing? I'm like, this card, it seems okay. And they're like, dude, it investigates. I had completely looked over the fact that investigate is a sentence on Ongoing Investigation.
Gotcha. That's crazy.
Yeah. So
that's funny.
Just jumped up miles right after that. It was like, oh, yeah.
That's
good
pretty
stuff.
Good. What about the Martialist card, or the Kenjiist card in this case? I'll tell you what LSV's is. Definitely Epitaph Golem. I mean, when he got to set that situation up, he loved that. And that is LSV in his most primal element, when he has completely decked himself, is setting up his draw stuff, has, the board completely locked up, and is just kind of owning you with it. That's definitely where he wants to be. What about for you?
I had written Incorrigible Youths, but I think the answer might actually be Heir of Falconwrath.
Oh, that card's so good.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, so I hear a lot of people say it's not that good.
What?
Yeah, I think I was watching Luis's stream, and he said it was just okay, or maybe even worse.
Oh, I'm gonna have to have a chat with that guy.
Yeah, but now that I think about it more, it's definitely the Kenjiist card. I mean, it's super aggressive. It synergizes with Madness. Even at the pre-release, remember, I had turn 4 kill potential with Heir of Falconwrath and Incorrigible Youth.
I remember that. You and I worked it out together. We're like, well, if you, and then, oh my God. And you're like, this kills on turn 4. I'm like, what the?
Like on a mulligan to 5 even.
Yeah. Wow. That's insane. For me, I had a couple that jumped to mind. There's like Stitch Mangler. I love that type of card. But, the card that I really, really, really liked to cast in this set, Confirmed Suspicions.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, baby. Just make it rain clues.
Value so much.
That was the counterspell that gave you 3 clues. I recognize that cards like that aren't great. They're not great. But man, when you get to do it, it feels so good. And so I put that as the Martialist card. Next one was, what was Marshall's Soapboxiest card? This is, going all the way back to John Lauk's days. He actually made this question back then, because, there's always some card I'll get on a tangent. This is a, and I actually did have one for this. I had a joke one, which is Triskaidekaphobia for reasons I've already explained, but the real one is actually Tenacity.
Yeah.
Which I know is weird. Yeah. So, I would stream or do my draft video, and people would yell at me for not taking a Tenacity, like 3rd pick or something like that. They'd be like, dude, there was a Tenacity in that pack. What are you doing? That card's insane. That card's amazing. And I'm like, that card's not that good. And they're just like, it is like, I won a game I just never could have won without it. I'm like, that's probably true, but you also lose games with that card sometimes that you wouldn't lose unless you had like a creature or just something normal in that slot. And I think that, Tenacity is one of those cards that has a very high ceiling. And these are the type of cards that I usually end up getting on my soapbox about. You know, my original soapbox card was Fog. Way back in the day it was Fog,
Yes.
right? Yeah, and that's another card that has a very high ceiling. You win games you just should never win when you have a Fog in your deck or in your hand, right? And your opponent's like, attack with everything, like Fog. And they're like, oh my God, I'm taking 13 on the crackback. I just lost this game. And you're like, Fog is the best, right? And Tenacity's similar, where like you get yourself into a race where you're like, creature, attack with everything. They're like, block one of them. And you're like, Tenacity, gain 14, kill your creature. And you're just like, oh my God, you know, I can never lose now. And so, but the problem is that they tend to forget the times when you don't have that many creatures. Your opponent kills your creatures. You're, you know, behind enough where Tenacity doesn't get the job. Then you don't have the right draw. It's too expensive, whatever. You know, you set yourself up with blocks. You play Tenacity, it gets countered, something stupid like that. You know, there's a lot of scenarios where Tenacity doesn't hold up. And while I do think it's playable, I'm not saying it's like a terrible card. That's certainly not what I'm trying to say. I just felt like people were way overrating it, trying to take it like second and third pick, when I think it's a card that like you maybe want one of in your white aggressive deck or something like that, or your white deck. And you can pick it up, you know, 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that, and maybe throw it in your deck, maybe not. So that was definitely my soapbox, because I felt like I had to give that speech multiple times throughout the course of the format.
I'm on the side of it being very, very good. Think of it as like a combat trick, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as an expensive.
Trick.
What's that?
Yeah, I think it's a bad combat trick. That's my whole point.
Oh, I know. That's what I'm
one?
saying. Well, it untaps your dudes too, so.
Well, no, but you're saying like as if it were to go on one creature, right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm saying that's bad. You know,
but it doesn't. That's what I'm.
Yeah, and it has upside. But so what I'm saying is that your side of it is saying, well, think of its floor. Right? You're saying,
correct,
like, what's this worst case scenario? And your worst case, reasonable worst case scenario is you have a creature and you get to cast it for some effect, right? And I'm saying that's bad. Like, that's a pretty bad, like, I would never play that card if that's all it did, right? Like, I don't even like, what's the green one called?
Aim High.
No, I like Aim High, the 4-mana one.
Oh, Might by Reason?
Beyond Reason, yeah.
Might Beyond Reason.
Like, I don't really like that one that much. And it's, again, it's hard for me, right? Because I'm trying to illustrate that I think that these cards should be valued lower than they are without saying that they should be valued low, right? Like, How do you take the stance of an argument where you say, you think too highly of that card, you need to lower that, without having the person come away thinking he doesn't like this card or he thinks this card sucks, right? It's a thing about, you know, how people communicate, that they tend to put ideas into, you know, a little bit more black and white than things normally play out, you know.
It seems extrapolated, you know. It's either yes or no, as
right.
Opposed to
like they could listen to our conversation and somebody could easily walk away who's not listening carefully and say, Kenji loves Tenacity, Marshall hates it.
Exactly.
Kenji's right, Marshall's right, you know, whatever, right? But that's not what I'm saying here, right? Like, I'm saying that I think the truth lies much more in the middle, and that people overvalue the card because of the blowouts that they see occasionally with it, while not taking into consideration the times when it's not a blowout or kind of not good at all, because it's such a clunky, you know, 4-mana spell.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
There. Now they're listening. I agree with Marshall there.
They're agree. Now they're listening. It's a podcast. I hope they're listening. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
There are a few, I think, but the number one that I see played most frequently is Briarbridge Patrol.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's a green, 3 colors for a 3/3.
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever it deals whenever it deals damage to one of our creatures, investigate. But then there's this paragraph below it that nobody ever reads. It's at the beginning of each end step. If you sacrifice 3 or more clues this turn, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. I like whenever somebody plays that. I
had no idea that even existed. I still don't believe you. I think you just made that up.
I know about the dealing damage and investigating, but I always have to double check. Oh wait, they sack this, and then that happens if they do. Okay, I got it. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Really funny, dude. That is so funny. I didn't even remember that last part.
See?
Luis said Essence Flux for him.
Okay.
Do you remember what that does?
1 blue, it's like a flicker that if it's a spirit, it gets +1/+1 or something.
Yeah,
right?
A counter, a +1/+1 counter. Yeah,
yes.
Exile target creature you control, blah, 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 blah. Yes, so you did. That's very good.
Oh, it's you control, though. Okay.
It is you control, yeah.
Okay.
And then the ones that I always had, and like I know these, but I always double check. I'm a double checker, and I always double check. It's Bound by Moonsilver and Angelic Purge, because one of them says sacrifice a permanent to move it. And the other one's like sacrifice a creature or a land as an additional cost or whatever it is. And it's like every single time I'm like, wait, is this the one that I can, exile an artifact creature or sacrifice a permanent, or is this the one that it's like specifically a land or whatever? And I always, get it mixed up, which one's which. Is that even right?
Yeah, you're right.
Is it? I can't remember now. I honestly can't remember. I'm looking them up. Bound by Moonsilver. Enchant creature can't block or transform. Oh, yeah, that part too. Sacrifice another permanent. All right, so that's what that does.
But you can only do it once each turn at sorcery speed.
Sorcery speed once a turn. Yeah, that part sticks in my head. Angelic Purge. What does that do? As an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a permanent. So so it is any permanent, but you can exile an artifact, creature, or enchantment. So I'm always like trying to remember if it's like certain, like, cause what was that black card we talked about earlier? Resolve.
Oh, Merciless.
Merciless Resolve is like, I think a creature or a land are the things you can sacrifice. And I think I always let it poison my thought process on Angelic Purge and Bound about what I'm able to hit. And then with Angelic Purge, I'm like, wait, what permanence is? I know it hits creatures, but I'm like, it's artifacts and enchantments. I know it hits enchantments because of my CSL deck. But anyway, I always pick them up and just make sure that I know for sure. This is a big one. What's your most drafted card on Magic Online?
So I checked it up. 72 Byway Couriers.
You're insane. 72 Byway Couriers. That's good, by the way. That's a good card.
Oh, yeah. So my secondary, well, not my secondary, but like right below them in some capacity, Fork in the Road, Rabid Bite, Stitched Mangler. Yeah, you know I like that blue-green.
Wow, dude, you're doing it. Yeah.
So good.
Luis also playing very well. He had 55 Thraben Inspectors. I wish I could get 55 Thraben Inspectors. I wasn't even close. And I tried to pick that card highly, but I think he might have been onto it earlier than everybody else. Mine, I had like 25 or 24 of 3 different cards. Jace's Scrutiny, Press for Answers, and Stitch Mangler. So apparently I played that tempo deck a little bit much, but yeah, for sure. The problem is I also draft on another account, so I'm not able to combine them, but I figure that this, gives me a good enough snapshot.
Right.
Okay. Moving down the home stretch here. The first thing is from a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How are the mechanics? What were some of the wins, the losses? And so I'm going to read what Luis wrote because he's the game designer out of us 3, and you and I aren't. So I'm going to just read what he had written in for us, since you and I aren't game designers.
How dare you?
He says, Shadows of Raiderstrahd was an awesome set. The flavor is on point and the mechanics really helped sell it. He said some big wins. Investigate played very well. Clues help smooth out draws, give you action throughout the game, and are very resonant. It was also awesome that there was a big network of clue build-arounds that overlapped in interesting ways like Ulvenwald Mysteries, Fleeting Memories, Ongoing Investigation, Grafmal Trail of Evidence, etc. Not all of them got there, but it was cool putting the pieces together. Agreed, right? I mean, that was a thing that you love to do in the format, Kenji. I certainly love doing investigating, and the clues felt just right to me too. Like they weren't overpowered where it was like, once your opponent gets 3 clues, you can't win. I definitely killed a lot of people with clues on the battlefield, but at the same time, it was exactly what Luis said. It smoothed out your draws, and I thought that was a big part of the equation because, you're going to miss a land drop. You can't cast your 3-ball or your 4-drop or whatever, and you're like, well, I'll crack this clue. Maybe I'll hit it, and it helps you hit it that much sooner.
I think that's one of the nice things about clues. It's just it reduces some of that variance of not hitting your lands on time or giving you something to do when you otherwise wouldn't. It's just good all around. Yeah, I also like the skill element to it of knowing when it was appropriate to crack a clue, when it was appropriate to affect the board. I also like the idea of passing the turn with an instant up and some number of clues available where you could punish your opponent if they did nothing, but you also had the ability to, cast an instant removal spell or trick or something like that. I thought that was a really cool thing too. So Investigate, huge thumbs up. I think that was one of the mechanics I was most excited about in recent memory, and it delivered.
Luis continues to say, transform cards have great flavor and many of them play well. Werewolves are still not my favorite for limited gameplay, especially the cheap ones, but those at least were small in number.
Duskwatch Recruiter.
Yeah. Now that one's uncommon, but think of like Hinterland Logger, right? That's just, I think cards like Hinterland Logger are not cards that they should print.
I agree.
Yeah. And the reasoning is simple. It's not because it's too good. Hinterland Logger, power level wise, I thought was perfectly balanced. I thought it was a fine card. It's because when your opponent misses a land drop or doesn't get to make a play and you get to hammer them mercilessly with werewolves, it's not fun. The game just ends way too quickly, and it turns a situation that's already a feel bad into a feel worse. And I don't like cards that exasperate the weaknesses of Magic, as it were. I mean, we all know that the mana system is a strength, not a weakness of Magic, but the fact that people get mana screwed and don't get to play your game is a weakness. And while I would prefer to not eliminate it entirely, because I think it is a part of the game, crushing people for it is not fun. And I agree with Luis, but the double face cards are still really cool. Even if a couple of the werewolves end up being a little bit, not as fun.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with that too. I think the number of them they have in the set is manageable, but it does lead to feel bad situations. And when those occur, it kind of just turns you off of the format a little bit, just
right.
Ounce by ounce. Like you'll keep playing it, but every time it happens, you're just like, just
totally.
One way or the other.
Yeah. I think that they did a good job balancing it. I mean, that was really the only one that I cared about. The messenger, the village messenger was like, whatever. I don't know. For some reason, that one didn't seem to have such a huge effect, like the log dog. He continues, having a wide range of deck types make the format very replayable. Humans, beat down, vampire, aggro, madness, blue-red spells. These decks all play very differently and coexist within the same format. Extremely fun. I agree. It definitely felt like there was a good diversity. I mean, it can't be perfect. It's not like every color pair has awesome, viable decks. But gosh darn it, they hit it. They hit plenty of them. It never felt like you were like, well, I have to say, this is in stark contrast to like Battle for Zendikar Draft, for example, where there were really only a couple of decks that I really wanted to be in at all, and the rest were just like, why would I want to play that? This isn't like that. There's definitely a lot of, you can move around and play quite a few different archetypes in the format.
Yeah, agreed. And just like you had, mentioned before, blue-white being your thing, I don't think blue-white's exactly a common thing for Shadows over Innistrad, but, it's something that you can do, and it's very viable, just like a lot of the other color pairings.
Yep, there you go. He says, on the flip side, this was a very complex set. Having a high complexity can make it intimidating, and there was a lot going on in Shadows over Innistrad. Still, the fun gameplay made it worth it, and overall, I have to give Shadows over Innistrad an A+.
Holy moly.
Gave it an A+. And that's like the highest grade I've seen him give. And, Luis looks at these, like when he writes this and when he talks to us about this for the Sunset Show, he is very much putting on his game designer hat for us and breaking things down from how he would see it as if he worked at Wizards or, was putting out a product and a game meant for a very wide audience, and we're obviously drilling into one aspect of a set, which is the limited gameplay and the limited, aspects of it. But still, an A+ from him is a big game. I think that Wizards should be very proud, and I think they earned it. I think this set was a very, very good set.
Agreed. I would definitely draft this format more. I don't have that developer's hat that Luis wears, and I guess you don't either. But
no.
Overall, it was enjoyable.
Yeah, totally. All right, just a couple of more here. First one. What did this format teach you? How did the format make you better at limited? What are the takeaways? And for me, it goes back to the clues. Time is key here, right? The big question, if you listen to the set review for the show, Luis and I kept asking over and over, okay, here's a card. It does something that's mildly desirable and you get a clue. Is getting a clue, does that push it over the edge from being kind of not playable to being playable? Jace's Scrutiny, perfect example. Press for Answers, perfect example. These are the type of cards that generally don't make the cut in a normal set, right? The tap your creature down, that's all it does. The shrink your creature a little bit, that's all it does. Those usually don't end up being hot cards or making the cut very often in sets. But when you add on getting a clue, which is like getting the card back, which is a big deal, but slowly at the cost of 2 mana, does that push it over the edge? And the thing I'm taking away from this, yes, it does push it over the edge. It turns out that those tempo plays, they are well worth it if you can get the card back, even if it is a little bit slow. The best way that I have to illustrate this too would be, something like if there was a card that costs 4 mana, let's say it was 3 colorless and a blue, and it said tap target creature. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, draw a card. Would you play that? Probably. I mean, it would make the cut sometimes, right? Like it buys you, it gets a creature out of the way at the cost of no cards, and it buys you some time. It's not a great card, but it's a thing. Maybe you'd play Jace's Scrutiny if it costs 3 or 4 mana as well, and instant speed. But the really cool part is that these are better than that, because you're getting this on the installment plan where you only have to pay 2 mana up front. And then whenever it's convenient, you can get that card back by paying the 2. It's much, much better to have it be flexible. And that pushed these type of cards over the edge. And overall, it felt like the format was quite well balanced. I thought that was pretty good. I think that the developers and R&D had a challenge on their hands when it came to the clues and to get everything worked out. If the format was really fast, I think the clues would have been not that good. I think if this was like a Zendikar-like format, I think that you wouldn't care about the clues because you just never have time to crack them. If this format was really slow, I think that anything that said clue on it, you'd be snatching up just because you could always crack the clue and you're just getting like free cards basically. As it turns out, it was somewhere in the middle. And I think it was really well balanced. And yes, I have killed opponents with 5 or 6 clues on the battlefield. And I've won games with 8 or 9 clues on the battlefield. And at the same time, I've used every clue I've been able to make for a game to just eke out a win or narrowly lose, but make it a really close game. And I think that they really hit a nice balance. So for me, time is key. That's my takeaway.
I'm in complete agreement with you. Going back to your installment plan thing, I think of it as kind of like Echo. If you remember that mechanic. Yeah, right? But with Echo, you would have to pay it immediately on the next turn, whereas with Investigate, you get to, just do it whenever you have convenient time to, if you even need to do so. And so you're getting a reduced cost, right?
Yep.
Something that you can cash in later. And it made it really, really nice.
Yeah, and you certainly latched onto the whole clues thing, didn't you?
Just a little bit.
The big question at the end, favorite card in the format. Kenji, I'll let you go first. What was your favorite?
I'm going to have to phone a friend here. I'm going to have to call the bloodline, as it were.
Boo.
No? All right, well.
No, I liked it.
Call the bloodline just one of my favorite cards, especially in draft where you can pretty easily build around it. You don't have to... it can go into the Madness decks, it can go into the Delirium decks, it can go to just some value decks as you're flooding out or drawing extra cards. It does it all. It's an enchantment. It just feels so good when I resolve a Call to Bloodline.
Yeah, that card is great. The Madness stuff specifically was great. And then also your art card for Community Super League is a sick combo with Call to Bloodline.
The Indulgent Aristocrat, yeah.
Unbelievable combo. I love that too. My favorite card? I can't believe I'm saying this. It was Thraben Inspector.
Holy moly.
That was I love that card. It made me so happy to cast it and so sad when my opponent did because I was jealous that they had it. I still... It's weird. We already talked about the sort of evolution of our mindset on the card. I still can't explain why that card's so good. I still read it and go, this just isn't that good. Yet every time I play it, I feel like I am Superman and I can never be beaten. And I'm just going to stop fighting the feeling. Thraben Inspector, high five. You're my favorite card in Shadows over Innistrad. I can't believe I'm saying it still.
All right. Well, I got a question for you.
Sure.
What do you think about Drownyard Explorers? Blue, 3 colors, 2/4. When it enters the battlefield, investigate.
Oh, Daddy likes the Drownyard Explorers.
Okay, so would you pay 3 mana to give a creature +1/+2?
Ish, maybe 2 mana.
If it was just a spell that said 3 mana, give a creature +1/+2, like a sorcery.
No.
So that's the upgrade of Thraben Inspector to Drownyard Explorers.
Well, look at that.
Right? And you said you like Drownyard Explorers. Well, Thraben Inspector is just
It's the best Drownyard Explorers ever.
Exactly.
Wow. You did it. You cracked the code. Now I know why. When somebody asks me, why do you like that card so much? I'm going to be like, it's like a little Dranyard Explorers, dude. Because I'm getting a mana, basically, right? That's what you're saying? Like, I'm shaving him. I love it. Kenji, you're a genius. You figured it out. I am going to not give Luis a choice here. And I'm going to say that his favorite card in the format, there's only really two options. There's Fevered Visions and Epitaph Golem.
Okay.
There's a few other. I know he likes Vessel of Nascency. That's another one that comes to mind for sure. I'm going to give it to Epitaph Golem. Luis likes Epitaph Golem the best. We'll let him correct me if I'm wrong, but otherwise he just has to live with loving Epitaph Golem forever. Yeah, sweet set. I'm definitely a fan, and we do get to keep drafting it. It is only going to be one pack of the 3 going forward once Eldritch Moon comes out. But hey, we still get to live in Innistrad for quite a while longer here. So it's not done yet, but that will do it for our time with actual Shadows over Innistrad. It was a good run. Kenji, thanks, man, for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Kenji came on with pretty short notice here as well, and I appreciate you making the time for me this week, Kenji, to get the show out the door.
Always fun, Marshall. Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next week.
Hopefully.
Hope so. All right. If you guys want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR, and he is Newmont the Nummy. You can find him at twitch.tv/Newmont the Nummy and at newmontgaming.com as well. I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by channelfireball.com, your place to go for awesome free content as well as everything you need Magic related, even Limited Resources gear. You can get LR sleeves, you can get LR t-shirts and LR deck boxes there made by Ultra Pro. You can check them out on the site there. And I got a few of them here to give away to some lucky patrons. At some point, I've got them set aside. I'm going to figure out how I want to box them up first because I've learned my lesson on that kind of stuff. But I do have some that I'm going to be shipping off, so that'll be cool. And next week, I'm going to give away the original Magic Art package, which comes with the playmat and the 2 packages of tokens. I'm excited to give that away. And if you want to take a look at that, you can go to the patreon.com/limited resources. I've got a post up there. Even if you're not a patron, you can still look and you can see what that playmat looks like. It is gorgeous. I remember saying before I'm going to give it away, and I'm obviously sticking to it, but now I'm like, oh my God, like I just want to keep this playmat. It's so sweet, but I'd rather have it in the hands of somebody who's going to get out there and use it anyway. So we'll be doing that next week. All right. Thanks for hanging out. And next week is going to be the Rules and Mechanics Show plus our exclusive LR preview cards for Eldritch Moon. We'll see you then.
Hi, I'm Neil Rigby. We're talking about Bad Beats, and this is quite a long-winded story, but it's a pretty epic one. It's back in 2001, and I go to English Nationals, and I lose my quarter-final, so I don't qualify for the Worlds. I come 5th. And then I'm at work and I get sent a package in the mail saying, congratulations, you've qualified for the World Championships. I don't think I have. So I phone Wizards up and I say, I've been sent a package saying I've qualified for Worlds. I want to double check, so I don't think I have. Girl on the other end of the phone says, yes, you've definitely qualified. And I'm like, oh, so if I get to Worlds, I'll be able to play Worlds. She's like, yep, definitely, it's on the computer here. Okay, great stuff. I'm quite poor at the time, so I end up getting sponsored to go by my friend who owns a card shop. And on the day I'm meant to go, I turn up to the train station late, so I miss my train. I then phone my friend who's in Brussels already, and I'm like, oh, I've missed my train, I'm not going to be able to make it. So I go home, and then he contacts me and goes, it's all right, I've arranged with the girl at the train station, you can change your ticket. So I get back to the train station, I say, oh, can I speak to Sarah? She said I can change my ticket. They go in the back, come back out and like, oh, Sarah finished 15 minutes ago, she's gone home for the weekend. So I come back home, phone down, I'm like, still can't make it, she'd finished work. He's like, how can you get to Brussels today? I'm like, the only way to get there is to fly. So he's like, find out how much it is. I'm like, right, it's £300 to fly a single there today. He's like, all right. I'm like, that's too much, you can't do that. He phones me back, he goes, it's all right, it's booked, get to the airport. So I get to the airport 3 hours early to make sure I'm like definitely on time for this flight. Fly to Brussels, get a taxi from the airport to the venue. I'm too late for registration. So they're like, oh, it's all right, we've arranged it, you can register in the morning. So I've not yet booked a hotel room, so I sleep on the Scottish guy's floor. I get to the venue in the morning, and I'm not allowed onto the venue because you need a pass to get on the venue, and I've not been able to get my pass. So eventually I have to wait for other people to turn up to go in and get me a pass, and they eventually let me in. And I go to the registration desk, and they just say, all right, if your name's on that list there, we need you to fill in the form, like the waiver. And if your name's not there, we've already got your waiver. I'm like, all right, it's not there, you must have my waiver. They ask my name, I'm like, Neil Rigby. So she searches through, she's like, how do I spell that? So I spell my surname, she's like, what's your first name? Spell my first name, they've got no waiver. So I'm like, well, what's going on? Like, well, if you've got no waiver, you're obviously not qualified. I'm like, no, the woman told me I was qualified. So they're disappearing, and I think it was Jeff Donnet was the head of organised play at the time. So they go and get him, he comes out, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, like, you've not qualified. So because you've not qualified, you can't play. At which point, like, I just, like, after the day I'd had the day before, missing all my flights, I just break down. I just go outside and I'm, like, crushed on the steps. And the Scottish guys whose floor I'd stayed on came in and were like, oh, what's up? I'm like, they've told me I can't play because I've not qualified. And one of them just goes, that's outrageous, we can't have that. So he goes storming in, and he's like, right, a representative of your company told my friend that he could play, what's going on? And essentially, because I'd not qualified, what had happened is, they thought I'd won my quarter-final, and it had been put on the computer wrong. And then they told this girl, Diane, they were like, oh, you need to phone him to tell him he's not qualified. And she remembered talking to me on the phone, but didn't remember the conversation. So she went, oh, it's all right, I've already spoken to him. Luckily, she was there, so I then go, oh, yeah, you spoke to me, but I phoned up to say, have I qualified? And she was like, oh, yeah, I did. And that's why I didn't ring you. And then they're like, oh, but you can't play because you've not qualified. So, like, I'm not allowed to play in Worlds. And then, like, I've obviously, like, my friend spent, like, 500 and odd pounds on getting me there. So it's just, like, utterly brutal. But then, luckily, like, my friend was just pushed the, this is where the bad beat turns quite, well, not great, but, like, a bit better. My friend was like, no, that's not acceptable. What are you going to do for him? Because you told him he could play. So they go off and they come back, they have a bit of a talk, and they come back out and they're like, okay, we'll refund all your travel expenses, and we'll give you a room at the, like, staff hotel. So I'm like, all right, that makes me feel less bad for, like, wasting my friend's money. And my other friend was like, no, that's still not enough. He was meant to be playing Magic for a week, and now what's he going to do for a week? So they're like, they go off and they come back and they're like, all right, we've organised it. You've got free side events all week. So they print out a piece of paper that says Neil Rigby doesn't pay for side events all week, and it was signed by Mark Rosewater, the head of UK DCI at the time, and Diane Thiering, who was the woman I'd spoken to on the phone. So I'm sat there and I'd sit down for a draft and they're like, oh, it's €12 for a draft. And I'm like, oh, I don't pay. And they're like, what? I'm like, I don't pay, I'm Neil Rigby. And then obviously, I'm nobody at this time. So I'm like, I don't pay, I'm Neil Rigby. And they're like, what? I'm like, if you go up to the side event desk, there's a piece of paper. So the judge would trot off. And then he'd come back and be like, oh, all right then. At which point everybody else in the draft is like, what the? Why don't you pay? And I'm like, because I'm Neil Rigby. And it got to the point where if ever there was 7 people in a draft, the judges would just shout my name and be like, do you want to be in this draft? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I ended up doing like 40-odd drafts over 5 days.
Do you still have the piece of paper?
I asked if I could keep it and they wouldn't let me have it. They were like, we can't let you have it, we're going to destroy it. And I was like, oh, I just want to frame it. That's all I want. But they wouldn't let me keep it.